When we think about culture, we often think about food, music, or holidays, but culture is also something deeper, right? It's how people tell their stories, it's how they express their identity, and sometimes it's even how they resist. In Hispanic communities, especially here in the Southwest, cultural expression has taken many forms over time. So today we're going to focus on three very powerful ones that we learned about when we were reading about the Chicano movement and how they've kind of grown and expanded with the help of the Chicano movement. So we're going to look at theater, we're going to look at poetry, and then we're also going to look at architecture. So as we go through this lesson, keep in mind, these are not just art forms. These are the way people have expressed identity, survival, faith, and resistance across generations. So before we dive into each one, we need to understand where this culture comes from. So let's talk about cultural foundations. Hispanic culture is not one single tradition, right? It's a blend. It's a mixture of different people, histories, and influence. In the Southwest, this includes a lot of indigenous traditions. So you're going to see some things that are part of like Aztec, Mayan, and Pueblo peoples, right? Pueblo and Asazi, the ancient ones. Spanish colonial influences like language, religion, architecture, and then also even some African influences, especially in music, rhythm, and cultural expression. This blending, doesn't happen randomly. It happened through colonization, through migration, and then also that cultural exchange between the people. And that matters because these reflect powerful relationships. Who had power, who resisted, and who adapted. And the result is a unique cultural identity that you can still see today in art, language, religion, and daily life across the Southwest. So let's start with theater. Theater has been a part of Hispanic culture for centuries, but it didn't always look like the way we think of it today. Right? During the colonial period, Spanish missionaries used theater as a teaching tool to teach about Christianity. They performed religious plays to convert indigenous peoples, and the performance told stories about like biblical events, morality, and then those Christian values and beliefs. So early theater, it was not necessarily about entertainment. It was a way to it was a tool of control and influence that was also entertaining. Over time, though, theater began to change. It became a space where communities could begin to tell their own stories, right? And during the 16 and the 70s, that Chicano movement that we read about played a major role in this shift. And one important group was the El Titro Campesino. And they used theater to raise awareness about farm worker rights and challenge inequality and educate communities. Their performances were often simple but really powerful. And they took place in fields, in community centers, and in public spaces. And today, Latino theater continues to evolve. It explores topics like immigration, identity, language, and bilingualism, and social justice. So theater, it does remain powerful because it's public and accessible, and it brings stories directly to people and invites them to reflect, question, and to also connect. So let's talk about literature, voice, identity, and memory, especially poetry. Poetry has been a long and powerful way for people to express their identity, their struggle, the pride, and the memory. Before written language, remember, many indigenous cultures relied on oral storytelling, and stories were passed down through generations to preserve history and values. Spanish literary traditions later added written forms of storytelling. So during the Chicano movement, poetry became a tool of identity and also resistance. One important example that I provided for you guys was I Am Joaquin. And if you will recall, that poem really explores what it meant to be Mexican American, that struggle for identity and the connection to history and heritage. And it gave voice to a community that often felt invisible. So our contemporary poetry, it continues to evolve, and you'll see it in spoken word performances. It used to be really popular like slam poetry events and then on social media platforms. Many modern poets explore immigration experiences, border identity, language, and code switching between English and Spanish. And poetry really matters and literature matters because it gives people a voice, especially when they feel unheard. Now let's shift from words and performance to like physical space. Architecture. It's more than just buildings. It reflects history, environment, and identity. So like you can see like the Spanish influence here along the roof tiles, the exposed wood, the arches. Here, of course. So these buildings were shaped by climate, available materials, and then also just cultural traditions, right? So adobe homes built from earth materials that were readily available. Spanish missions, often, those religious and colonial structures. So architecture can show like that religious influence when you have those Spanish missions. It can also sort of like social hierarchy and cultural values. One of the most powerful forms of cultural expression is public art, especially murals. And I love this because we are surrounded by so many murals here in Phoenix. Everywhere you turn, there is a mural, right? I mean, they are everywhere, and I love that. We have several murals here on campus. So murals are there and they tell stories about history, identity, resistance, and community. So you'll see murals on buildings that transform the space. They turn neighborhoods, like you drive up and down, like, any neighborhood, and there's murals on the walls. People have murals in their backyards. The electrical boxes out in Surprise where I am, there's murals on all of those electrical boxes. Sometimes they blend into the environment. Sometimes they're like, they don't. It's so cool how many murals and forms of art expression are here in the Phoenix area. So the Chicano movement, I mean, that was really like this huge moment. It doesn't create theater, literature, or architecture. They had already existed, right? What the movement did, though, was amplify them. It brought cultural expression into schools, into universities, into public spaces, into neighborhoods, into streets, right? And it encouraged pride in language, heritage, and identity. And most importantly, it helped with this shift in perception. We go from marginalized culture to recognized cultural power. So today, Hispanic cultural expression it's still evolving, right? You can see it in theater addressing immigration identity. You can see it in literature and poetry shared through spoken word and social media. You can see it in murals and street art in places like here in Phoenix or out in Los Angeles. That architecture that blends tradition with modern. And culture is still being used to tell stories, to build identity, and to challenge inequality. So at the end of the day, Hispanic culture expression, it's not just about art, it's about history, identity, and resistance. And while the Chicano movement brought visibility to these forms, the story didn't start there, right? And it doesn't end there either. Culture is always going to be evolving. And through poetry, literature, theater, architecture, communities continue to tell their stories, and they continue to tell their stories on their own terms.